You have become something they can no longer predict, and that single fact is quietly dismantling every plan they thought they had for you. Let that sit for a moment before we go any further, because I know exactly what your instinct is right now. Your instinct is to shrink this down, to call it a coincidence, to tell yourself that people are simply busy and distracted, and that nothing has really shifted. But you already know that is not what is happening. You have felt it in the room. You have felt it in the silence after you speak. You have felt it in the way certain people used to finish your sentences for you, used to know exactly what you would say before you said it, and now they hesitate, they pause, they watch you the way someone watches a door they are no longer sure is locked. This is not paranoia. This is not overthinking. This is you finally noticing what has been true for a while now, which is that you stopped being predictable, and predictability was the only thing keeping certain people comfortable around you. Think about who you used to be to them, not who you actually were, because those are two very different things, but who you were in their minds, in their private calculations, in the quiet mental file they kept on you. You were reliable in the specific way that made you manageable. They could guess your reactions. They could anticipate your limits. They knew which buttons produced which results, and they used that knowledge, sometimes carelessly, sometimes with real intention, because it worked. It worked for years. It worked so well that they never had to consider the possibility that it might stop working. Here is what nobody warns you about growth. It does not usually happen as a single dramatic turning point, even though people love to tell that kind of story. Real growth happens the way a vault resets its own combination, quietly, from the inside, without asking permission from anyone standing outside the door. One day the numbers that used to open you are just numbers again. They no longer mean anything. The people who memorized your old combination are still turning the same dial, waiting for the same click, and it is not coming, and they do not understand why. That is the exact discomfort you are watching ripple through the people around you right now. They are still trying the old numbers. They are still saying the things that used to work, applying the same pressure in the same familiar spots, expecting the same familiar you to show up and absorb it the way you always did, and you are not showing up that way anymore. Not because you are punishing them, and not because you decided one morning to become difficult. You simply changed on a level deep enough that the old access no longer applies, and there is nothing anyone can do to force their way back in through a door that has quietly, permanently rebuilt itself from the inside. Let us be honest about how unsettling that is for the people who relied on predicting you. Somewhere along the way, without any announcement, you stopped being a fixed set of known reactions and became something else entirely, something that recalculates itself in real time, something that cannot be mapped from old data anymore. And people who built their entire approach to you on old data are now standing in front of a locked door, turning a dial that means nothing, wondering what happened to the version of you they thought they understood so completely. Consider your career for a moment, because this is where the shift becomes almost impossible to hide. There was a version of you that could be managed with a title, with a vague promise of future recognition, with just enough praise to keep you working twice as hard for half the credit. That version of you accepted the crumbs and called it gratitude. That version of you stayed quiet in meetings when your idea got repeated back to you in someone else's voice, because you told yourself that speaking up wasn't worth the friction. They assumed that pattern would hold indefinitely. They assumed your patience was infinite, or worse, that it was simply your personality, some fixed trait rather than a temporary accommodation you were making for people who had not yet earned your full effort. Then something recalibrated. Maybe it happened after one meeting too many. Maybe it happened slowly, the way rust happens, until one day you looked at the arrangement and it no longer made sense to you. Whatever the trigger, you started asking for what you were actually worth, and you started backing that ask with a calm certainty that had never been there before. Exactly. That calm is what unsettles them most, because desperation they know how to manage. Confidence rooted in nothing they can quantify is a different problem entirely, and they have no established procedure for it. Now look at your family dynamics, because the shift shows up there in an entirely different shape. Families build roles early and expect you to perform them forever. You were the peacekeeper, or the responsible one, or the one who absorbed everyone else's chaos so the household could keep functioning. That role required you to be predictable in a very specific way. It required you to always show up, always forgive quickly, always smooth things over, even when smoothing things over cost you something real. For years, that vault opened every single time because the combination worked and nobody, including you, questioned it. But you are not opening the same way anymore. You still love them. That has not changed. What has changed is your willingness to sacrifice your own peace just to keep an old family script running smoothly. You have started letting silence sit instead of rushing to fill it with your usual explanations and apologies. And the confusion this creates in the people who counted on your old role is not subtle. They keep trying the same emotional appeals that used to work instantly. And now there is a pause, a genuine consideration on your part, instead of an automatic yes. And that pause terrifies them more than any argument ever could, because arguments they can prepare for. A calm, considered no is something else entirely. Your romantic relationships tell a similar story, though the mechanism looks slightly different up close. Somewhere in your history, someone learned exactly which reassurances kept you patient, which small gestures of affection could buy weeks of your tolerance, which apologies, even the shallow ones, could reset the entire dynamic back to zero. That was the old combination, and it worked because you wanted so badly to believe that people meant what they said. You extended trust generously, sometimes too generously, and the pattern held for a long time. That pattern is not holding anymore, and you already know it. The reassurances that used to land now sound thin the moment they leave someone's mouth, because you have learned to listen for the gap between words and consistency, and that gap is where the old trust used to live blindly. You are not cynical. Do not let anyone convince you of that. You are simply no longer willing to mistake a well-timed sentence for genuine change. The vault does not open for pretty words anymore. It opens for pattern, for proof, for sustained behavior over time. And most people who benefited from the old version of you never bothered to build that kind of proof, because they never had to. Now think about your own self-perception, because this is the quietest shift of all, and also the most important one. You used to negotiate with your own reflection. You used to look at yourself through the borrowed opinions of people who had never once earned the authority to define you, and you let their careless comments recalibrate your sense of worth for days at a time. A dismissive tone from someone at work could ruin your entire evening. An offhand comment from a relative could replay in your head for a week. That was the old you, endlessly recalculating your value based on inputs that were never reliable in the first place. That negotiation has ended, not because you stopped caring what happens around you, but because you stopped outsourcing the final decision about who you are to people who were never qualified to make it. You still hear the comments. You are not immune, and nobody truly is. But there is a new distance now, a beat of space between hearing something and absorbing it, and in that space you get to choose whether it deserves entry. Most of it does not. Exactly. Most of what used to wound you deeply now simply passes by, noted and released, because you finally understand that other people's opinions of you were often just confessions about themselves. And your social circles, the ones built years ago around a version of you that no longer exists, are feeling this shift most sharply of all. You used to be the convenient one, the one who showed up regardless of how you were treated, the one who kept extending invitations even when they were rarely returned, the one who could be relied upon to fill the silence, smooth the awkwardness, carry the emotional weight of the group without complaint. That role required a very specific, very predictable version of you, and for a long time you played it flawlessly, because you did not yet know you were allowed to want something different. You know now, and the moment you stopped auditioning for approval that was never going to be freely given, the entire dynamic destabilized. Some people quietly drifted, unable to adjust to a version of you that required actual reciprocity. Others tried harder, almost desperate, sensing that the old combination no longer worked, and scrambling to find a new one before you moved completely out of reach. Watch closely and you will see it. The ones who only valued the convenient version of you are the loudest about missing the old days. Funny how that works. Now consider your past mistakes, because this is the domain people rely on most heavily when they want to keep a version of you locked in place. Old mistakes are useful to people who benefit from your smallness. They get pulled out at strategic moments, dusted off and presented as evidence, as if the person who made that mistake years ago is somehow still fully in control of the room today. For a long time, that tactic worked on you. You would hear the old story surface and immediately shrink, immediately apologize again for something you had already spent years repairing, immediately hand back whatever ground you had gained, simply because someone reminded you of who you used to be. That tactic does not work the same way anymore, and they have noticed. You still own your history. You are not pretending it did not happen, and you are not demanding that everyone forget it on command. But you no longer treat old mistakes as a permanent combination that unlocks your compliance whenever someone needs a little leverage. Growth, real growth, means the vault re-encodes itself around who you are becoming, not around who you were at your lowest, most reactive moment. When someone tries the old combination now, expecting the same guilt, the same immediate retreat, they get silence instead, or a calm acknowledgement that carries no shame in it at all. That silence confuses them far more than an argument ever could. Here is the deeper truth sitting underneath everything we have covered so far. A vault does not announce that it has changed its combination. It simply stops responding to the old one, and it lets the people standing outside draw their own conclusions. Some of them will assume you are being cold. Some will assume you have changed for the worse, that success or boundaries or self-respect somehow corrupted the version of you they preferred. Let them think whatever helps them sleep at night. Their theories about your transformation are not your responsibility to manage, and chasing their approval of your growth would only prove that the growth was never as complete as it looked. What they are actually reacting to, underneath all their confusion and their whispered theories, is fear. Genuine, quiet fear, because a person who can no longer be predicted is a person who can no longer be controlled through familiar means, and control, once lost, is exceptionally difficult to regain. They are recalculating in real time, trying every combination they can remember, testing old triggers to see if anything still lands. Nothing does, and with every failed attempt, the truth becomes a little more undeniable to them. The version of you they built their expectations around simply does not exist in this form anymore. You did not set out to become unpredictable as some kind of strategy. You did not wake up one morning and decide to confuse the people around you for sport. What happened was quieter and far more honest than that. You simply stopped performing a version of yourself that was designed for other people's comfort. And comfort, once removed, always looks like unpredictability to the people who relied on it. Let us go even deeper into what this actually means, because there is a layer here most people never stop to examine. A vault that resets its own combination is not simply protecting what is inside. It is proving that what is inside was always more valuable than anyone standing outside ever fully understood. Think about that for a moment. Nobody builds elaborate systems of pressure and manipulation around something they consider worthless. They only build those systems around something they need access to, something they have benefited from taking without asking, something they assumed would always remain available to them on demand. That is the part that should genuinely reframe how you see everything you have been through. Every manipulation attempt, every guilt trip, every carefully timed old story dragged back into the light, every attempt to keep you small and familiar and useful in the exact way they preferred. All of it was an unintentional confession of your value. People do not fight this hard to keep access to something they consider unimportant. They fight this hard because some part of them always knew what you were capable of becoming, and they needed you to stay unaware of it for just a little longer. You are no longer unaware of it. That is the entire shift in a single sentence. You see the mechanism now. You see the old patterns for exactly what they were: transactions disguised as relationships, convenience disguised as closeness, control disguised as care. And once you see a mechanism clearly, it permanently loses its power over you, because manipulation depends entirely on the target remaining unaware that they are being manipulated at all. So here is what I need you to sit with as we move toward the end of this. You are not required to explain this transformation to anyone. You are not required to apologize for the door that no longer opens the way it used to. You are not required to hand out your new combination to people who only ever valued the old one. Let them keep guessing. Let them keep testing numbers that used to work. Their confusion is not cruelty on your part. It is simply the natural result of a system finally protecting what it was always meant to protect. You are the version of yourself that stopped negotiating your worth in exchange for approval. You are the version that lets silence answer questions that do not deserve a defense. You are the version that recognizes an old manipulation the instant it walks back through the door, dressed up in a slightly different outfit, hoping you will not notice it is the same tired trick. You are the version that chooses peace over performance, even when performance used to be so much easier, so much more familiar, so much less lonely in the short term. You are the version they cannot map anymore, cannot predict anymore, cannot quietly manage anymore, and that version of you is not going anywhere. So stop apologizing for the door that closed the way you closed it. Stop over-explaining a change that was never anyone else's decision to approve. Stop shrinking yourself back down to a familiar size just because your growth made someone else uncomfortable in a room they used to control effortlessly. None of that discomfort belongs to you anymore. Hand it back. Let them sit with it. Let them recalculate. Let them try every old number they can remember, because none of it is going to work. And somewhere underneath the confusion, they already know that. You are the vault that reset itself. You are the version of yourself that finally stopped being convenient. You are unpredictable only to people who never really knew you, only to people who mistook your patience for permission and your kindness for weakness. To anyone paying real attention, you were never actually unpredictable at all. You were simply becoming, slowly and quietly, exactly who you were always meant to be, and it only looked sudden to the people who were too busy benefiting from the old version of you to notice the process happening in real time. Let this be the moment you stop asking permission to be this version of yourself. Let this be the moment you stop feeling guilty for a piece that other people cannot manipulate their way into anymore. You do not owe anyone a warning before you change. You do not owe anyone a map to the new combination. The only thing you owe yourself is the follow-through, the discipline to keep choosing this version of you even on the days it feels lonely, even on the days the old approval would be so much easier to accept than this hard-won self-respect. They can keep guessing. They can keep turning the dial, hoping for the old click, the old give, the old you who would eventually cave if they just pushed a little longer. It is not coming. That door is not opening for old numbers ever again. What is behind it now belongs entirely to you, protected, recalibrated, and finally out of reach of anyone who only ever valued what they could take from it. You were never meant to stay predictable. You were only ever meant to become exactly this. And now that you have, nothing they do, say, or remember about who you used to be can put you back behind that old door again. If this found you at the right moment, drop the word unpredictable in the comments so I know it landed. And if you needed to hear this today, stay a little longer. There is more where this came from.